Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense. Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino, and I am here with our other co-host, Joe Quadzilla LaVacca.
Wow, you were working on that one.
Yeah, I was.
You were working on that one.
It came to me late last night as I was laying in bed. I don't know why. I was just thinking about you, Joe.
The more you think about me laying in bed, particularly my legs, makes me very happy.
That's it. There you go. I'm glad I made your day there. You can find this on social media at Joe Gambino DPT for myself and at Strength in Motion _PT for LaVacca. Did I get that right? I feel like I just messed it up. Okay, great. And this podcast is on Instagram as well, Beyond Pain Podcast. And you can find this episode live on YouTube as well, Cups of Joe _PT. And we do have a guest with us today, Diana Florio. She is a physical therapist, a yoga teacher, the co-founder of Breathe Physio Yoga. Welcome into the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. It's so fun.
Yeah, thanks for not signing off the minute Joe started talking about me in bed last night. So I was like, what's the quickest way to make our new guest uncomfortable?
Yeah.
That's it. That's off the bat. First intro sentence. So thanks so much, Diana, for being here. We're so excited to have you.
It's so fun.
Hope we didn't lose too many of our 16 listeners either.
Yeah.
No, it's growing, Joe. It's getting bigger. We're on the cusp. I can feel it.
Consistency is key.
So Diana,
you guys are doing it. Yeah.
Tell us about yourself for the people who may not know you. What do we do? Where are you from? We'll start there. Anything interesting? And then we got some fun questions for you.
So I live in New York, in Long Island, and I live quite close to you, Joe, which is fun.
Couple blocks away.
I am a physical therapist and a yoga teacher and a strength and conditioning specialist. I love blending the modalities of all things movement, mindfulness, mindset, breathing, because I was lucky enough to see myself and my patients and my clients as whole people who need all of the things all of the time. I became a PT after being a biology major in college and being pre-med and taking the MCATs, and then never giving that folder of applications to my advisor because something inside me said no. And I started personal training, and I became a student in physical therapy school. And then I got led to yoga, and all of it all came together for me in several ways. But it really became clear when I was a PT working at the Hospital for Special Surgery in Manhattan in sports medicine that there is just so much more than 3 sets of 10 for rehab for anyone with an injury. And I just started merging yoga, mindset, breathwork, and PT together. And so I guess when my first kid was born, I was really starting to use PT and yoga together in Manhattan with a lot of private clients. And I got together with a friend of mine, Emily, who also worked at HSS and was working with yoga training schools, bringing physical therapy principles to yoga training schools and teaching yoga teachers how to move better, smarter, safer. And we decided to create a teacher training, and that teacher training was for yoga teachers, and that was the first instance of physio yoga existing in the world. So that's sort of my professional story. I also have 3 children, 11, 9, and 6. They're very busy. Myself, I'm like in the perimenopausal era of my life. So I am strength training like a beast, and I am doing my HIIT work. I just attended a live symposium with Stacey Sims. I am like drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm going for it. I do my yoga every day or my meditation. I walk. I like really try to practice what I preach. So that's my story. for the first part of it, I guess. There's a lot more.
We will definitely dive into a lot more of that. A couple fun things there. You also mentioned your 3 kids, but I think you left one out. I think you have an older child as well, Kellen.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I did leave him out. He is,
Yeah.
I would say, I do parent him in a weird way. I mean, I give him a lot of guidance. Personally,
Kellen, we love you, buddy. We're just messing with you.
I know.
We just
He would say
messing
the
with you.
same. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what have you, just sticking to your quick professional side, because I know you mentioned the perimenopausal stuff. That has been a hot topic for a lot of people, including Court and I, in our conversations. What are you working on? Anything coming down the pipe in that sort of vein where we can get excited about?
Totally. So in the distant future, we are in the very early stages of developing programming for perimenopausal women. We really want to piggyback off of Vonda Wright's paper, The Musculoskeletal Syndrome of Menopause, and talk about all of the changes that happen, arthritis, sarcopenia, frozen shoulder, blah, blah, blah. And also how we can use downregulation techniques for thermoregulation. So those flashes, we know there's science behind downregulating and navigating those. But that's in the distant future. What's in the near future is something I'm really excited about. In the last few years of my life, I have embarked on a whole new discipline or a whole new part of my skill set, which is pelvic floor manual therapy. I always felt like pelvic floor was sort of a missing piece for all PTs. I think all PTs should understand the function of the pelvic floor. It is such an integral piece of how we stabilize, breathe, digest, move, pee, poop, have sex. And I think if we're working with an athlete or a postpartum mom, everyone needs to have a functional pelvic floor. So I've developed a course around how to unlock the power of the pelvic floor without doing any internal work. So this is for personal trainers, yoga teachers, Pilates teachers, PTs, OTs, anyone who wants to understand how the pelvic floor is related to how we breathe, to our mindset, to our stress state, to what our foot can do, our hip can do, our spine can do, our pelvis can do, our neck and head can do. So it's a framework to looking at the different pieces of the body, breath, and nervous system. And then it is a system of learning and exploring different restorative tools that you can use to help people progressively unlock their pelvic floor. Like I said, you don't need to do any internal work. Everything is basically movement-based and talk-based. I'm really excited. That launches in January.
That's amazing.
Along with some live stuff and bonus content and all the fun things. Yeah, super excited.
I think we'll have a lot of questions for you about that today. I have also another question for you, but before we get into the questions, we have one question we have to ask you mostly at the start of the show, and it's how do you take your coffee? Since we have this coffee theme on the podcast, it's yes.
Wait, what if I didn't drink coffee? Would I not be allowed?
No, that's an acceptable answer. You can
then the interview would be over.
I grind my beans the night before. And I brew in an electric Rebel pot, and I drink it with raw sugar and half, like full fat, dairy.
There you go.
Yep. I'm a believer in all that whole
any reason
stuff.
For the grinding the night before?
Yeah, that's what I was interested.
Yeah. So I want to have it ready for me when I come down the stairs. I am
there you go.
kind of like a zombie at 6:30 with kids begging for 3 different breakfasts. I'm like, just give me a second.
Yeah, Joe, I thought there was some like unlocking aromas.
Exactly. Yeah.
Diana, we've
based
learned
on
so
previous
much.
guests we've had, they've, everyone has this, very unique way.
Ritual.
I thought there was something behind it, but yeah.
I could surely come up with something
new.
No.
Hey, make it easy for you in the morning. That's exactly what I would need in my life. So
yeah.
So well, I feel like both of you have this system, though. Joe's system is so wonderful, and I was actually able to taste Joe's iced coffee, and it's just amazing. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I don't even want to bother having to. I should grind my own beans, but I am too lazy for that. So when I get the beans at the place, I just have them grinded for me. It's not the best, but it works. So, and
well, what about this?
I did actually really hate cleaning the grind.
I don't clean the grinder.
I hate having to clean the grind.
No, I don't clean it. I'll send
maybe
you the one I use.
Maybe that's my trick that I need.
Yeah.
Okay,
But when
perfect.
I grind the beans, I put my hands on the grinder because we have a barazza, and it takes like 2 minutes. And I actually do ground myself then and like take a few diaphragmatic breaths because it's
There you
just like
go.
a ritual. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So you may want to get a
I
grinder
like
and
it.
just hold that space.
There you go. Maybe I'll give that a try. Yeah, send it to me for sure. I'd be
Hmm.
interested in looking because I hate the bean grinder we have here.
Yeah, I've
But my
been through a
first
lot.
question for you really is, you have this unique background, and it's, for me, I was a PT first. I did a whole bunch of strength and conditioning at the college level, and then I became a PT. And I feel like all those things have combined and created my philosophy. So it seems like it's been similar for you. You started as a trainer, you went to PT school, you started yoga. How have all of these things come together to impact your overall philosophy?
I just feel like from being a personal trainer, it was really the first place where I got my lens at really looking at how people move, their strategies, their motor control, how their day that they had before coming into the gym affected how they moved and what they might have needed at that point. And so I think I've always been a people person. Like I've always wanted to understand people, understand their why, understand their root, understand what's going to work for them. And so I think in personal training, I really understood like, okay, this person really needs to just speed it out before we can even slow down and work hard on like meaningful work. This person needs to ease in slowly and feel safe and supported and feel like I'm really cueing them to, engage their abdominals properly before we do anything else. Like just understanding people. I think I brought that into physical therapy. Like I said, when I was working in sports at HSS, I was a unicorn. I was one of the first people there who ever even thought about how their patients thought and breathed. And it was really about movement. And so I was really able to use my people understanding what makes this person tick, what motivates them, what makes them feel safe, what challenges them in that space. And then when I brought the yoga in, I was like, oh gosh, this is kind of what I've been doing, but almost codified into a system of how we can think about ourselves, think about the world, think about our effect of people in the world, our effect on people in the world, and how we can put that into practice, into like a little bit of a package. And so everything became unified in that place. It gave me a way to unite mindset, breath work, movement, and look at how people put all these different pieces together. And so I feel like all of my patients get a unique blend of all of these things, depending on their story and their goals and how they look, how they present, how they breathe, how they move.
Yeah, no,
And
I like that.
yeah, and one of the things I was thinking of there when you were mentioning all these different types of people and bringing in the blended approach. People are consciously dysfunctional to some degree, right? They seek us out because I have knee pain, it doesn't move, my back is stiff. Very rarely, though, are people aware of how maybe opportunistic their movements are. And I find that they're probably even less aware of how stress, mindset, like kind of impacts all this stuff. So maybe we put that in like the unconscious, like dysfunction, right? No idea, not even on my radar. So as you're taking all these like blended approach, do you have specific things that you look for, your team looks for to maybe prioritize or educate the client in front of you so they understand a little bit more about maybe the path that they can pick to achieve their goals? And maybe like mindset, breath work, exercise, we hear all these things all the time.
I think I can tell you about how we evaluate and how we train people to evaluate. We teach in our yoga teacher training the BPSS model. So when you're doing an interview, you're looking for and you're listening for pieces of the biological story. You're looking at a movement assessment that we've developed and you're picking out like, that foot doesn't pronate so well. And then you're looking for psychological pieces of the story. What are they telling you? They're saying, man, I feel so out of shape and I've gained so much weight. Like that's a piece of that psychological story. And then they may say something, and then we look for social cues. Like, oh, I'm so busy, and at home I feel so unsupported. There's just, what's it like to be you? What's it like in the day to day? Well, I come home and I do all these things, and like I'm cooking and cleaning, and then we say, well, is there anyone else around? Or are you connecting with friends? And they're like, it's not really time for that. And we ask questions based on the spiritual, like, well, what do you do to get outside your head? What do you do to find joy? And we listen, does this person have gratitude? Does this person have the sense of awe? Do they have a sense of greater joy and exploration outside of them? And so we collect all of these pieces, and it becomes sort of like, well, what are the things that we found? And we move from there, and we try to attend to all of these pieces because, again, we're all whole humans. And we know from countless articles and pain science literature that everything we feel is developed from a multifactorial web that our brain constructs. And so if I want to change this pain web, I have to attend to all of the different pieces because that's how the brain is wired. The brain is wired for efficiency. It's going to pull on all of the things that are stressing to create the output of pain. And so, unfortunately, we don't prioritize one or the other. We always kind of use all of them at once. There is a sort of a method that we do. And for me, when I have someone come into my clinic, usually the first thing I do after I do the interview and I bucket their assessment is, you guys know there's like an emotional color wheel or like ruler and like mark brackets work and all those different colored emotions, right? Like red is anger and blue is sadness and yellow is joy. So I use one of those. Say, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling anxious? Are you stressed, overwhelmed, fatigued? And so we start there, right? And we say, okay, say there's a low back pain patient who comes into my clinic and their low back is stiff. And they're like, well, I can't tie my shoes and all these things. And I'm afraid to move. I'm just afraid. And so we pick out, yeah, okay, you're afraid. So let's recognize with some awareness that your key emotion is fear. And then let's work on that key emotion. I usually go to breath work because I know that if I can educate someone to breathe, I can regulate their nervous system. So we'll do like an elongated exhale breath. Inhale for 4, exhale for 8, 5 times. We know that'll help with the vagus nerve when the diaphragm is moving, and that will help us feel like we're in rest and digest. I don't think we can really heal when we're not in rest and digest. Right? We need to come out of that fear state to this middle place. And then now it's like, okay, so I want you to think about your mindset differently before we move. I want you to move with meaning. So I want you to say, look, you can't tie your shoes, but you're waking up in the morning, you're getting out of bed, you're making your coffee, you're able to walk to the bus stop. Like, look at all these things you can do. And I want you to think about all those things you can do and just keep that in the back of your head as how you are safe in some movements as you do your mobility work. And so then I'll give them an exercise program that is not 3 sets of 10. It's slow, it's mindful, it's can you keep your breath steady as you do these hip circles? Can you keep that idea in your head of all the things you can do as you do some nerve flossing? And so we're doing it all together at once to unpack and sort of hit all of those layers of the human. Because I think that's just so much more valuable than checking the box of 3 sets of 10. And I do that kind of work when I strength train framework I've implemented. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think, yeah, for sure. And I think for people listening that I always talk about removing barriers. And a lot of times the barriers for many people is the stories we build about ourselves. And if we don't recognize that we are the narrator of our feelings, of our emotions, of basically everything that happens to us and every experience, I think that recognizing that is really key. And I think that was, you definitely answered my question, because I think when people recognize that initial barrier, for many people, it's not pain. And we've talked about this on the show a few times. It's this fear, it's the anxiety, it's the uncertainty. So if you can start by addressing that, then I think you're on the same page with kind of co-narrating a new story, or, a new way of thinking for people, which is, I think you highlighted a lot of things there, like not only this mindset approach, but then reframing or reconceptualizing the good that's still going on in your life that we lose track of. And then kind of moving on to, okay, well, what other physiological movements or things can you manage with or cope with? What I've always loved about the system that you guys implement is that added S, right? That sort of like spiritual, sort of joyful component. And I'm wondering if there is a little bit of a personal side for you and your team. I do have the pleasure of knowing a few of them. And I know some of you guys have your individual pain stories and journeys. What was that like for you at an individual level? And did that kind of help you with that BPSS sort of approach when you sort of reflect back?
Yes. Short answer. Yeah.
Well, if
I
you
can tell
want
you
to dive
more.
into that personal stuff,
Mhm.
yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that's aside from the coffee question, the other real consistent question that we always have on the show for guests is, your own personal pain journey and how you grew from that. And again, the model that you have, the team that you've built, they all have such unique stories that I think shape their perceptions and how they help clients. So it's always really interesting to people to realize that they're
Yeah.
not alone. And me and Joe and you all kind of suffer or have suffered with the same thing.
Yeah. So the pain story I always tell, and I don't think I've had anything ever as bad as this, except for giving birth. It's just, and that is not an anomaly. Was I was in my, I was working in the clinic at Goldman Sachs at the hospital for special surgery open, which was crazy. And that's another story. And I went through a big breakup. Like, I had been living in this beautiful apartment with someone, and I was like, I'm done with this. And I had to move out, and I moved into this like tiny, itty apartment in Brooklyn, 5th floor walk up. First time I'd been on my own in the city. I was working really hard in and out. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? Because I'm all fired up and I feel a little bit unsafe in my apartment. My best friend, Kara, who's part of the team, was like, let's do boxing. We're going to go to the Church Street boxing gym down in Tribeca. We're going to beat stuff. That's how we're going to get over it. We're going to upregulate. We're going to fire ourselves up. We're going to hit stuff. We're going to work hard until we feel like we're going to puke. And that's how we're going to get through it. I was like, yes, I'm in. Let's do this. I am tough. I live by myself in Brooklyn. Let's go. And so 5 classes in, and I pull something in my back. I'm doing those sit-ups where you're punching the guy, and I'm going for it. And something goes, right? And I can't even get home. I'm limping, crying, down into the subway, up the 5 flights of stairs. I'm I am F. Something so bad has happened to my back. I've so damaged myself, and make an appointment. I go see the physiatrist at HSS. He's like, you're fine. I'm like, I'm not fine. I'm hurt. I can't even move. I go to work the next day. I'm crying. Long story short, it gets better, right? And how it gets better is I give in to feeling sad, to feeling to mourning the relationship that ended. I let myself feel my feelings. I name them. I'm sad. This was hard. I can't beat my way out of it. I need to sit in it. I need to breathe in it. I need to slow down. I started going for a walk. I started doing yoga. I started connecting with a community in yoga. I started connecting with myself. Started realizing my patterns. Oh man, I'm really holding my sadness, my frustration in my back and my hip. really tight. And I feel a little bit safer, and I tell myself I'm safer. All of that tension lets go. And I have not had a back injury since. It was, sharpshooting, cry, pull your breath out of your body pain. And through unwinding the story and not resisting the story, but giving in to what my body was telling me, which was you just need to rest and feel it, I got a lot better. And I think that bringing the yoga practice in, that slowing down, to feeling, to connecting with nature and my friends really was that S that brought me healing. Crazy.
It's not crazy at all. Joe has very similar episodes with his back. And Joe, I don't know if it was connected to when I left Perfect Stride for you. Was that a similar
That's when I
experience?
started feeling better. You were there while I was suffering, so it was not connected to you leaving. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was no stressful event around it. It started somewhere in my mid-20s and just lingered on and off for quite some time. So yeah, I got no real explanation for it. So
Yeah,
I never got imaging. I was always too good to
totally
go get looked at by a doctor or anything like that.
I want to dig in.
So
I want to dig in.
There's
Joe's
never
varied stuff. Maybe it was with your just peeling back the layers on Joe Gambino. Oh man, I love it. So Diana, I mean, your personal story there, I think, sheds a lot of light on your system of approach now. And I think part of what makes you so relatable and your team so relatable is that you had to go through those lows to kind of recover and recognize what was important to you. So you mentioned a lot of things about community and feeling feelings. I mean, is that sort of the biggest gift that you think you have with blending physical therapy and yoga? Are there other elements to it that you'd like to talk about that you think are really important for maybe people who are seeking alternative types of movement or communities to find some healing in?
Yeah, I definitely strive to create community, and in our teacher training and in anything that we're doing with our online studio, we're constantly getting the feedback that we are just warm and welcoming, and we really don't have anyone on our team who has an ego. Like, everybody is inviting, warm, gentle. We're here to empower people, not to dictate what we want them to do. We're here to empower. And I think just by who we are, like, part of yoga, movement, the poses, the breath work, these are like 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga. There are other limbs of yoga called the yamas and the niyamas, which are sort of this like moral code that was created thousands of years ago by Patanjali and his crew. And so there's sort of like these ideas of how you present yourself in the world. And one of them is ahimsa, which you may have heard before, but it means to do no harm. So as you're moving through life, doing no harm to yourself, so awareness of any negative self-talk, but also do no harm to those around you. And so there are more than ahimsa, but I think all of us that are on our team, all of us that are teaching the professional ed and the studio classes, embrace this moral code of how to be a human and know that really the only thing that we have that's permanent is our relationships and our kindness and our compassion. So we are full of that for the community that we're trying to create. And part of that is ahimsa and not harming, and satya, being truthful. Like, these are principles that we all stand by and believe. The other thing that I think that we're trying to do, especially in our online studio, which is unique, is so much of our online classes are created to teach movement or breath work, but they're through the lens of curiosity. We really want to foster a curiosity in all of our students to explore inside their body. We say, like, how does this feel? Or what do you feel when? Or what does that feel like? And not to judge themselves. So I think we're trying to foster a deeper relationship with yourself through the movement and breath work that we teach, so that people can walk away with some understanding of their habits, their patterns, their stories, how they move, how their foot hits the ground. And it's through that lens of empowerment that we want to do that.
Like empowerment's always a key word that Joe and I talk about so much.
Yeah, no, I love that as well. I do want to shift gears though a little bit here because I'm just really curious. It's just something that I've always, and I've been just like, I think a little bit more and more interested, especially with Jen, 2 pregnancies now and everything that's kind of happened as it's affected her body. But I want to shift the question a little bit more to the topics, I guess, pelvic floor in a sense. Since it's something that you've been focusing on, and we definitely have not talked about that at all on the podcast. I guess my first question is if we're just like otherwise healthy people, maybe they have some pain, they come to see you, what kind of things tend to pop up that make you think that somebody may need pelvic floor work if they don't necessarily know that may be an issue for them?
Good question. You can talk about bowel bladder. So, do you poop regularly? What's it like when you poop? Is it hard to poop? Do you not poop regularly? Are you constipated? How many times are you peeing a day? So 8 times is kind of the norm. More than that, and that's too many usually. How much are you peeing? You're just dribbling. Do you pee when you sneeze, cough, jump, run, laugh? Let's see. Do you have tailbone pain? Do you have pain with penetration? So intercourse, tampons. Do you have pelvic pain? And then the second level of questions would be, I've had back pain for years, or I've had hip pain for years. I've seen PTs. I've done PT. I've done manual therapy. I've done McKenzie. I've done chiropractic. I've done all the exercise. I've had a hip scope, and they're still in pain. The pelvic floor is right there, and it controls our intra-abdominal pressure. So if you have a two-tone pelvic floor, you could create a lot of havoc on your spine because you pressurize your abdominal canister to the point where mobility is limited, breath is limited. The pelvic floor creates forced closure of the SI joint. It helps to stabilize the hip, the pelvis. You need a stable pelvis for a healthy hip. So yes, those like bowel bladder sex questions, and pain questions, but then that secondary like digging. Have you tried stuff? And if you have still are suffering, then I would take a look inside and see what's happening because it's right there. The proximity of the pelvic floor to the hip, as the crow flies, is very close. They're virtually on top of each other.
Have you found those conversations difficult to have with clients, whether they're male or female? I feel that there's so much stigmatization associated in that area. People are here to see us for back or hips. So what were ways that you've either gently approached that topic or maybe dealt with some difficult conversations, especially as you were getting going? So I think that's really helpful for both the client and the clinician to hear if they're both listening.
So I think you can tell through, I wouldn't be the first thing I would bring up. I would definitely have the conversation, peel apart some of the layers. And then someone like my husband or someone like that who's very like business, I would say, part of every evaluation I do is I ask about bowel bladder habits because you have muscles there that control those functions. And sometimes those muscles can be part of our pain. So I'm going to ask you, do you pee when you sneeze? And how often are you pooping? Do you ever experience constipation? So that's like the most plain black and white way I bring it up. It's definitely an easier conversation for me to have with people who've had babies because they know that we're going to have that conversation. Sometimes I bring in humor and I talk about how my poor husband, how when he's stressed, I tell him to breathe into his butt. And it makes him laugh. And he's like, what are you talking about? And it sounds so ridiculous. But I'm like, no, but can you? Because you might be gripping your pelvic floor because you're so stressed. We know that when you
Got it.
grip your neck and your jaw, your pelvic floor is gripping as well. And so that could just make you feel crappy. So, and I'll say that to my kids too, and they'll laugh about it. I don't know. And so I'll tell people, hey, this is something that's silly. I tell my kids sometimes because they think it's funny, but it's actually something that's beneficial. So I try to humanize it a little bit. I think if you can bring up the fact that a lot of people are doing pelvic floor therapy, a lot of pro athletes, if you can name someone, I don't know of anyone offhand, but I am sure there are people who've unlocked performance by working on their pelvic floor. I think those are good icebreakers too. It's hard, but the more comfortable you are with talking about it, the more you make it not seem like a big deal, but just part of the regular evaluation, or you can humorize it a little bit, the better. Yeah, I'm just very comfortable with it because it's like the bicep. I mean, that's how much of a role it has. It's more than the bicep. That's how much of a role it has in everything we do.
Interesting. I like that a lot. Yeah. I also like the idea of anytime Avery is getting stressed out, I'm just going to say, could you breathe through your butt a little bit? And I'm going to thank you for that, Diana, because I do think that is, I think it is, like you said, like in the beginning, it wouldn't be the first thing right off the bat. And I always know in my intake form with past medical history, bowel or bladder issues are there, constipation. And sometimes people check that off. And if we're in the middle of an assessment or not quite sure where to go, I always resort back to their medical history, because sometimes people are more comfortable writing things out or checking a box than they are kind of bringing it up. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can probably broach that topic with people to say, hey, I know you mentioned in your intake form, oh, wow. A lot of people are like, you read my intake form? I'm like, well, yeah, I wouldn't give it to you if I wasn't going to read it. Right. And they were like, well, I don't think anyone's ever really asked me that. I'm like, well, you thought it was enough to, check a box or write a little sentence on it. So I think that could be an interesting way to broach that topic as well. And, like you said, with so many different angles of approach, identifying an emotion or the barrier in their narrative to moving on to mindset. And I feel like a lot of the pelvic floor stuff, at least the way that you were initially describing it, comes back to maybe recognizing those emotions and the mindset. So do you feel like with your treatment applications towards pelvic floor, I know you said there's this online course coming out in January. It's an online course, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's non-manual based. Do you feel like there's a lot of connection to like the breath work you do with people benefiting their pelvic floors? Because then that would be another great selling point for people to approach breath work, where it's not just, whoa, woo woo. I don't have to, it's actually giving them some sort of physiological benefit. Have you found that?
Yeah. So much of the course is about breathing for the pelvic floor and about being aware of what your pelvic floor is doing. So a lot of times people have pelvic floor issues, and just like to go back for a real quick second, I had a person who was constipated for 20 years, and they're like so freaking desperate that they're like, yes, let's talk about my pelvic floor, whatever it takes. So sometimes people are just so at their wit's end, or they've had like chronic tailbone pain. So just FYI, people are really suffering, then they're ready. So we talked about the body, right? So the pelvic floor is affected by the pelvis and the hips and the feet and in the rib cage. But the pelvic floor is also intricately involved in how we breathe. And so I think this is most fascinating when you look at someone who's pregnant. So as you get pregnant, your belly grows a lot. So by the time you're about ready to give birth, your diaphragm, which normally is a flat-ish muscle, and then when you inhale, flattens and descends so that you can take a full volume lung breath. That's because that creates a negative pressure inside your lungs, your pleural cavity. When you're pregnant, your diaphragm is up in your rib cage and stuck up in your rib cage. So that breathing mechanism is not working. And so a lot of women have a hard time connecting to and strengthening their pelvic floor postpartum, because just like the diaphragm does this with every breath, down on inhale, up on exhale, pelvic floor does the same thing. So when we inhale, the pelvic floor descends, widens, lengthens. So all 2 or 3 holes you have should open on inhale. And that's a lengthening. like your bicep lengthens. And then on exhale, it rebounds and comes back up. That's how you shorten. If you can't get a full length, if the pelvic floor doesn't fully descend, open, and widen because you can't get a full inhale, then if you have a full bladder and you cough, sneeze, jump, and your pelvic floor is stuck here because it couldn't fully lengthen, it can't shorten to close the sphincters to support the urethra. That's how a lot of people leak, and that's sort of like not able to get that full length. And so we do a lot of breath work to get that 360 jellyfish breath back, where you're coordinating diaphragm and pelvic floor. And because the diaphragm is 360 degrees, some people need more diaphragm expansion in the back versus the front. So that's what the course dives into. As far as mindset goes, I've had women come into my clinic and say, I have a type A vagina, because they know, they've seen other pelvic floor PTs who've done just manual work, that no matter what manual work they do, they're still here, right? They grip, they're stressed all the time because they think they're threatened by the world because that's stress. And, some people grip in their upper traps, some people grip their butts. Check in with your butt right now. Can you widen it out? Can you breathe into it? A lot of us grip our butts. But people don't know, right? So a lot of the work we do in this course is to do a little bit of work on the representation of the pelvic floor and the cerebellum. So we're highlighting, or we're sort of like lighting up the pelvic floor in the brain, because a lot of people don't even know what their pelvic floor is doing at rest, because the representation of the brain and the motor and sensory cortices is very small compared to like our hands and our mouth and our tongue. And so I'll use different like ball rolling techniques and pelvic floor mapping techniques to increase the density and the connectivity of the pelvic floor and the brain, so that it's easier for people to say, oh, I'm doing the dishes, I'm gripping my butt, my pelvic floor is tense. Okay, Diana said I should breathe when I do that. So now I'm going to breathe into my butthole. Now my pelvic floor, which was like this and not able to help me with my peeing or my core, is like, okay, letting go. And so it's that repetitive repatterning that I really seek to educate people about.
I like that. You're starting to answer a question that I had. So you talked about breathing, you talked about the diaphragm, the pelvic floor mapping. My question kind of really is, when I moved here, I worked in network practice for a while. When you're trying to close on a mortgage, you can't be a business owner, especially when you move states. It's very hard to do so. But one of the places where I worked, I kind of like bumped around between different locations, and there was a location that they did a lot of pelvic floor. They were pelvic floor specialists. But when I'm watching them do stuff as far as treatment goes, it looked no different than if like somebody came in for lower back, and it's like band work, get on the bike to warm up, like typical what you would see in a fast-paced PT environment like that. So really the question, I guess, outside of the things that you talked about, what should somebody who's listening expect from pelvic floor treatment, as far as like what's going to be happening in there, that maybe the conversations that are had, like as far as the overall philosophy goes, that might help them determine if like where they are going, if it's like good for them, or how to find a good practitioner.
Yeah. I think you said how to find a provider that's appropriate for them. So I think if you've been suffering with pelvic floor issues, or you think you may have been suffering with pelvic floor issues for a long time, I would look to find someone in your town that is a pelvic floor physical therapist, but that can see you for at least 45 minutes one-on-one, because so much of the initial intake and treatment is really based in patient education. Not only is there a possibility of manual internal work, which you really should be comfortable with your provider, and that does not need to happen if you don't want it to happen. Definitely not at the first session, but there is a lot of talking about your pregnancy history, any trauma that you may have had. It's nice, or it could be very useful to talk about trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma, your stress patterns, your bowel and bladder habits. And then there's a lot of education around how much water to drink, what are bladder irritants, what kind of diet should you have so you have regular bowel movements, how should you be moving, how should you be sleeping, how your stress can relate to your pelvic floor. And so much of this is lifestyle. And so a lot of pelvic floor PTs talk a lot about lifestyle. And then there can be conversations around if you have prolapse and you need an external support to help you with that, or there can be conversations around pelvic wands if you're too tight. So there are a lot of layers to pelvic floor health that happen conversationally. So I think finding someone who can spend the time with you to talk. And then, like I said, an internal assessment is helpful for the provider to understand really what your patterns are, how strong you are, what your endurance is like. If you do tend toward more tone than less. And then there should be a prescriptive exercise program. Just like any PT, I firmly and strongly believe that there should be more than just manual work. And I also think that there are pelvic floor PTs that just do manual work. And there should always be movement, breath work, mindset involved. I think the people that you saw, Joe, in the clinic that were doing the bike and the bands, hopefully they were on a path of strength at that point, and that their PT was educating them how to control, contract, relax their pelvic floor during those exercises, as well as building the surrounding muscle strength, which is really important for pelvic floor health as well. We need strong glutes, core, hip flexors, hip rotators.
You answered my question very well there. And I think the big themes that I hear out of this is that it's holistic looking at things, right? It's lifestyle, it's food, it's, not just the exercise program or the manual components of things. And I think that's what, any good provider starts to do is they start to peel back the layers. It's not just about the movement in itself, but it's about how can you start to complement the person as a whole.
Great. Well, this is excellent. Out of respect for your time, Diana, why don't we wrap up with anything that you'd like to leave the audience with that you find important and that you maybe really want them to take away from the things that we spoke about today?
I think the simplest and maybe the most useful take home that I think is empowering to my patients, and they're always like, is to be a bit more embodied and aware and to try to develop a better relationship with yourself. So I always give people simple check-ins, like, maybe you're brushing your teeth and you want to check in with your brain, like where are your thoughts, or you're brushing your teeth and you want to check in with your grips. Like, are you gripping your shoulders right now? Can you let them go? Are you gripping your butt right now? Can you let them go? Or maybe you want to check in with your breath. So you're maybe doing the dishes or driving your kids around and you just want to check in, like, how am I breathing? Where am I breathing? Where do I feel my breath? I think establishing a better relationship with your patterns, understanding where your thoughts are, your tension is, your breath is like, can be a nice first step into exploring doing some more mindfulness in your whole life, which can be really helpful built into movement for pain. That's really where I'd start.
I love it. I think that's very, very well put. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that? How do they find you?
So we are on Instagram at Threes Physio Yoga, and we have a website, which is threesphysioyoga.com. You can contact us through there. You can join our online library and try some of our services. And I think that's really it. Hopefully that's enough.
All right.
And I hope people reach out. I'd love to talk.
Yeah. I think that the resources that you guys have put together, seeing some of the behind the scenes work, I think what you're doing is incredible. I hope people go check it out because the resources that you have there are phenomenal. And I think they go well beyond pelvic floor stuff and can help almost everyone that comes across your page. So, Joe, any other last questions?
Then for me.
All right. Well, Diana, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We tell every guest we love you. Joe, love you. Listeners, we love you. And don't forget to come back next week for another episode of the Beyond Pain podcast.